He threw my bouquet on the floor of the altar. Not dropped, threw. A short, contemptuous motion. The white roses and eucalyptus I had chosen myself, landing in a scatter of petals and broken stems at the base of the altar steps. And Nathaniel Ashcombe looked down at them with the mild distaste of a man disposing of something he had already forgotten the value of. "You were a pastime," he said, into a microphone that carried his voice through St. Aldwyn Cathedral's soaring stone acoustics, reaching every one of the 310 guests seated in the pews. "A pleasant one, Vivian, I'll grant you that, but a pastime nonetheless. I needed something to occupy me while I waited for the right arrangement to present itself. It has, as of this morning. What would you do if the man standing beside you at the altar, mid-ceremony, threw your wedding bouquet on the ground and told 310 witnesses that you had never been anything more than a placeholder? What would you do if, at that exact moment, the cathedral's rear doors opened and a woman began walking up the aisle toward you, toward your own wedding, wearing a gown of ivory silk that could only mean one thing, while your groom turned to watch her approach with open, undisguised anticipation? I did not cry. I did not collapse. I stood at that altar in my own wedding dress, watching another woman walk toward it as though she had been invited, which I would soon learn she had, and I kept my chin level and my eyes fixed on Nathaniel Ashcombe with an expression that made the nearest bridesmaid take an involuntary step backward. They had no idea, not Nathaniel, not the woman walking up that aisle in her own bridal white, not his mother Constance, seated in the front row with an expression of pure, satisfied triumph, that in exactly 8 minutes, the streets surrounding St. Aldwyn Cathedral would fill with the sound of military engines, that armed generals in ceremonial dress would march through those cathedral doors before any second ceremony could begin, and that the quiet woman they had just publicly discarded was Her Imperial Highness Vivian Odette Ashgrove, granddaughter of Emperor Leopold Ashgrove III, sovereign ruler of the Ashgrove Dominion, a nation whose treasury made every fortune in that cathedral, including the one Nathaniel was about to marry into, look like rounding errors, and they had absolutely no idea that within the hour, a formal imperial decree would strip Nathaniel Ashcombe of every asset bearing his name and transfer the whole of it permanently into mine. Let me take you back nearly 3 years to a woman named Vivian Ellery. Vivian Ellery worked as a special collections librarian at a small university library, spending her days cataloging rare manuscripts and assisting researchers who came in search of documents that existed nowhere else in digitized form. She wore modest blouses, carried a canvas tote with a fraying handle, and lived in a 2-room apartment above a hardware store where the smell of sawdust drifted up through the floorboards each afternoon. She was 28 years old, unremarkable by every visible measure, which was precisely the disguise I had constructed for myself over nearly 3 years of deliberate, careful anonymity. My real name is Vivian Odette Ashgrove, and my grandfather is Emperor Leopold Ashgrove III, sovereign ruler of the Ashgrove Dominion, a nation whose sovereign wealth fund held controlling interests in global shipping, telecommunications infrastructure, and 4 of the world's largest private banking institutions. I grew up inside palace walls surrounded by advisors, ministers, and a rotating series of approved suitors, each one selected by my grandfather's council for the political or financial advantage he could bring, each one regarding me in unguarded moments with the particular calculating warmth of a man performing silent arithmetic behind otherwise pleasant eyes. By 25, I had asked my grandfather for time away, time to discover whether an ordinary version of love existed for a woman whose face had appeared on commemorative currency before her 10th birthday. He granted it, reluctantly, with a discreet security detail monitoring from a careful distance I would rarely notice. I became Vivian Ellery. I learned to love small, unremarkable pleasures, standing in line for coffee without anyone rushing to intervene, eating lunch alone on a library bench without a single person calculating my net worth from across the courtyard. I met Nathaniel Ashcombe at a fundraising gala the university hosted for its rare book preservation fund. He was there representing his family's private equity firm, charming in a way that felt effortless, attentive in a way that felt, at the time, genuine rather than performed. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, remembered small details I mentioned in passing, and made me laugh twice within our first half hour of conversation. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind I had not produced around a stranger in longer than I wanted to calculate. For nearly 2 years, Nathaniel gave every appearance of being exactly what I had left the palace to find. He drove 3 hours one weekend to help me move apartments. He remembered that I took my tea with too much milk. He proposed on a walking bridge over the river at sunset. With a modest ring he told me he had saved months to afford, and I said yes with my whole heart, believing I had finally found something real. Then his firm secured a major new client relationship, and with that success came his mother, Constance Ashcombe, entering our engagement like a slow, deliberate poison. Constance was the kind of woman who had married comfortable wealth decades earlier and spent every subsequent year manufacturing the appearance of belonging to a grander tier of society than she actually occupied. She wore Dior to breakfast and carried a rotating collection of handbags she referenced constantly, unprompted, in conversation. She met me for the first time at a family dinner, looked at my department store dress with an expression of polite, devastating disappointment, and said, "Nathaniel tells me you work with old books. How charming. Is there any real future in that sort of thing, dear?" The cruelty accumulated steadily after that, always delivered with a practiced smile, always constructed so that objecting would make me appear oversensitive rather than her appear unkind. She introduced me to her friends as Nathaniel's little library project, a phrase repeated so often it stopped registering as unusual to the people around us. She commented on my apartment, my modest car, the absence of any family connections she could leverage socially, always circling back, eventually, to some implied deficiency in my prospects. Then came Alessandra Voss, heiress to a private banking dynasty whose personal fortune had been estimated in financial publications at well over $4 billion, built across 3 generations of European wealth management. She entered Nathaniel's professional orbit through a potential merger between her family's institution and his firm, and within weeks, she was present at every function that mattered. She sat beside Nathaniel at his firm's quarterly dinner, while I was seated 2 tables back with junior associates. She laughed at his jokes with her hand lingering on his forearm, a beat too long. Constance adored her instantly, discussing wedding venues with her as though the marriage being planned belonged to Alessandra rather than to me. I confronted Nathaniel once, quietly, in our kitchen. I asked him why his mother treated me like an intrusion, and why Alessandra Voss seemed to occupy more of his attention at every event than the merger itself required. He rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture I had come to recognize as the physical prelude to capitulation. "Vivian, please." The Voss banking relationship could transform the firm entirely. My mother thinks Alessandra's involvement helps secure better terms. Can you just, for the next few months, not push back so hard? It's not personal. It's just business. Just business. As though my repeated, systematic humiliation belonged to some category unrelated to the man who claimed to love me. I should have left that night. I did not. I told myself the wedding would resolve everything. I was catastrophically wrong. The wedding was set at St. Aldwyn Cathedral, a Gothic structure of soaring stone arches that Constance had insisted upon for its genuine pedigree. 310 guests filled those ancient pews, drawn from Constance's social circle and Nathaniel's professional network, dressed in the understated luxury of people who never needed to think about the cost of anything they wore. I walked down that aisle in a simple ivory gown, on the arm of a family friend standing in for the father I told everyone had passed away, since my real family remained, as always, a secret even from the man I was moments from marrying. The ceremony began. We reached the vows, and Nathaniel, instead of speaking his, looked past me toward the cathedral's rear doors and smiled. "I need to be honest with everyone here," he said, into the small microphone clipped to his lapel, his voice carrying easily through the stunned cathedral. "I've been trying to write vows for weeks, and every time I kept thinking about what I actually need for my future. Vivian is a lovely person, but lovely doesn't build an empire." He bent, picked up the folded vows from his own hand, and instead of tearing them, simply let them drop beside my bouquet, which he then kicked once, sending the white roses scattering across the marble. "You were a pastime," he said. "A pleasant one, but a pastime nonetheless. I needed something to occupy me while I waited for the right arrangement to present itself. It has, as of this morning." The cathedral's rear doors opened. Alessandra Voss walked up the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, her own wedding gown, worn to my wedding, timed with a precision that could only have been planned for weeks. A ripple of scandalized delight moved through the crowd, the particular electric energy of an audience witnessing something they will describe at dinner parties for the rest of their lives. "Alessandra's family finalized the banking merger this morning," Nathaniel continued, his voice full of an eager, undisguised pride. $4 billion in combined assets under management. None of it happens without this. I wanted her to walk this aisle today because, frankly, this is the wedding that actually matters. Constance rose from the front pew, radiant. "Finally," she said, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, "someone who understands what real value looks like." Laughter rippled through pockets of the crowd, cruel and immediate. A woman near the back murmured not quietly enough, "Well, you can hardly blame him. $4 billion walked through that door. What was the librarian going to offer? Overdue book fines?" I looked at the bouquet scattered on the floor. I looked at Nathaniel, at Alessandra approaching in her own bridal white, at Constance glowing with vindicated satisfaction. And I said nothing, because I had learned, across a lifetime longer and stranger than any of them could imagine, that the moment before you reveal your true strength is not the moment to reveal your weakness. "You should not have thrown that bouquet," I said quietly, my voice carrying anyway through the stunned cathedral. Nathaniel laughed, incredulous. "Or what, Vivian? What exactly are you going to do about it?" I reached into the small clutch tucked against my ruined bouquet, withdrew a phone, black and unmarked, and dialed a number I had prayed for 3 years I would never need at my own wedding. "Grandfather," I said, "it's time." Within minutes, a low mechanical hum built beneath the cathedral's stunned silence, resolving into the unmistakable rhythm of military vehicles and rotors approaching in coordinated formation. The cathedral's ancient windows rattled faintly in their frames. Through them, guests could see the street outside, filling with black vehicles bearing a gold crest, a crowned falcon, the sovereign emblem of the Ashgrove Dominion. The great doors opened, and generals in ceremonial dress, deep navy with gold braid, marched down the center aisle in formation, past 310 frozen guests, and stopped before the altar. Behind them walked Emperor Leopold Ashgrove III, 79, silver-haired, his presence filling the cathedral more completely than any crown could have. "Granddaughter," he said, his voice carrying without need of amplification, "I regret arriving after the insult rather than before it." The word detonated through the cathedral. Granddaughter. Alessandra Voss, halfway up the aisle in her stolen bridal white, stopped walking entirely. "Emperor Leopold Ashgrove," he said, turning to the frozen congregation, "sovereign ruler of the Ashgrove Dominion. The woman your groom just discarded as a pastime is Her Imperial Highness Vivian Odette Ashgrove, heir apparent to a treasury that makes the Voss banking fortune a rounding error in our quarterly reports." Nathaniel's face drained entirely of color. "That's not possible. Vivian works at a library. She was hiding from men exactly like you," the Emperor said. One of his attorneys stepped forward, opening a portfolio. "Mr. Ashcombe, the prenuptial agreement you signed 4 months ago, believing its standard paperwork, contained a clause triggering total forfeiture of your assets upon any public humiliation of the Ashgrove heir. That clause has activated. Ashcombe Capital, your accounts, your properties, all of it transfers to the Ashgrove Sovereign Trust, effective immediately. The Emperor raised a second document, sealed in gold wax. And by imperial decree, effective this moment, the entirety of Nathaniel Ashcombe's remaining personal holdings, seized under sovereign authority for offense against the heir, is hereby transferred in full to Her Imperial Highness Vivian Ashgrove as restitution. Alessandra fled the aisle in her ivory gown. Constance collapsed into her pew, and Nathaniel dropped to his knees, begging, and I looked at him with nothing left in my expression at all. "I'm ready to go home, grandfather," I said, and we walked out together, past 310 silent witnesses, into a convoy of 40 black armored vehicles waiting beyond the cathedral doors. True power, I have learned, does not need to shout. It signs a decree and walks away. What did you think of this masterful revenge? Did he get exactly what he deserved? If you loved seeing arrogant elites lose everything, smash that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story of karma and justice.